Barbara Lenz, a 31-year-old woman from Iowa, went missing on May 6, 1989, after being dropped off at her apartment in Woodbine by her then-boyfriend Robert Davis. She was expected to travel to Omaha, Nebraska to visit her former partner, the father of her 3-year-old daughter, but she never arrived. Her family became concerned when they had no contact with her and eventually reported her missing to the Woodbine Police Department on May 17. When police and family members entered her apartment, they found that Barbara was gone, but her personal belongings, including her purse, wallet, clothes, and luggage, were still there. Her pets had also been left uncared for, and there were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. It appeared she had made no preparations to leave for any extended period, and no one close to her knew of any plans to go away. Investigators determined that Robert Davis was the last person to see Barbara alive. He claimed she had called him from Omaha to say she was with her daughter, but the police discovered that she never made it to Omaha. During the investigation, several people came forward stating that Barbara had expressed fear of Robert. She reportedly told at least 2 people that Robert had threatened to kill her if she ever left him. Robert and Barbara had a history of alleged domestic violence during their 2-year relationship. He had reportedly assaulted her on multiple occasions, including strangling her until she lost consciousness. In another incident, Robert allegedly struck Barbara's young daughter in a public setting, witnessed by Barbara and others. Robert admitted to police that he had committed these acts and also acknowledged that he disliked Barbara visiting her daughter and the child's father in Nebraska. He said the two had argued before her May 6 disappearance. One witness claimed to have seen Robert injure Barbara by slashing her cheek with a sharp object. Another person reported seeing Robert and Barbara leave her apartment together that day. Strangely, later that same evening, Robert was seen alone at a local bar, claiming he couldn't find Barbara despite having been seen leaving with her. Just hours earlier, another witness came forward to say that shortly after Barbara's disappearance, they saw Robert and his brother bury something wrapped in plastic in a rural area near Robert's property. That witness later revisited the site with Robert's brother, who showed them the exact spot where the hole had been dug and helped his brother hide whatever it was. The criminal complaint did not confirm if authorities excavated the area or what was in the plastic. Several other people told investigators that Robert had made threatening remarks to them over the years, saying they could end up like Barbara during heated arguments. Despite these concerning reports, Barbara's remains were never found, and the case went cold. 17 years later, in 2015, mushroom hunters discovered human remains inside a 55-gallon barrel. The remains were initially believed to be Barbara's, but dental records later showed they belonged to someone else. The discovery, however, led to the reopening of her case. As the case was re-examined, investigators concluded that based on Robert Davis's violent history, threats, and suspicious behavior, he had killed Barbara willfully, deliberately, and with premeditation. On March 10, 2025, Robert Davis was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. At the time of his arrest, no attorney was listed for him. Barbara's daughter, Lindsay Balgard, said the arrest felt surreal and was something she had waited her entire life for. She said she never thought the day would come and added that true justice for her would be finding her mother's remains and bringing her home. Also noted was the unrelated case of Army Sergeant Calvin Wilhite Jr., who in May 2015 was walking through downtown Memphis, Tennessee with his fiancée when their night took a tragic turn. Born in 1989, Calvin had shown a strong sense of duty from a young age, eventually joining the U.S. Army. He served honorably for 8 years, including a deployment to Iraq, and rose to the rank of sergeant. His family would spend nearly a decade seeking justice for what happened to him that night. Calvin Wilhite Jr., an Army sergeant and devoted father, had faced the harsh realities of war and survived. He was engaged to his fiancée, with whom he shared 2 children, and took immense pride in fatherhood, ensuring his family was cared for and loved. On the night of May 24, 2015, Calvin and his fiancée were walking through downtown Memphis, Tennessee, after spending the evening enjoying the vibrant atmosphere of Beale Street. The area was alive with music, laughter, and crowds as the couple made their way down South 4th Street, near the FedEx Forum. Their peaceful evening took a dark and deadly turn. A dark-colored vehicle approached, occupied by 3 men. Rather than simply passing by, the men began directing harassing remarks toward Calvin's fiancée. Calvin, refusing to ignore the behavior, confronted them. What started as verbal confrontation quickly escalated. Tensions flared, and in an instant, the situation turned violent. One of the men in the car pulled out a firearm. Before Calvin could react, gunfire erupted. He was shot 3 times and collapsed to the pavement as his fiancée watched helplessly. The attack was sudden and brutal, shocking bystanders who had no chance to intervene. Gunshots rang out through the night, disrupting the normal buzz of the entertainment district. At approximately 12:05 a.m., officers from the Memphis Police Department's Entertainment District Unit arrived at the scene. They found Calvin critically wounded and unresponsive. The area was chaotic, crowds in shock and confusion. The assailants had already fled, speeding away in their vehicle, which disappeared southbound across Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. Emergency. Responders acted swiftly, rushing Calvin to Regional 1 Hospital. Despite the efforts of medical staff, his injuries were too severe. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. In just moments, the life of a soldier, father and partner was stolen in an act of senseless violence. An investigation was immediately launched. The Shelby County Medical Examiner confirmed Calvin's death as a homicide, prompting law enforcement to focus their efforts on finding those responsible. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage, canvassed the area, and interviewed witnesses. Descriptions of the suspects soon emerged. The driver was described as a black male, approximately 22 to 25 years old, with a light complexion, hazel eyes, and a distinctive high-fade haircut with curls on top. The shooter, also a black male of the same age range, had a darker complexion, a chubby face, and wore a fade hairstyle. He was described as having a small to medium build. Witnesses reported that the shooter had leaned out of the passenger side of the vehicle, wearing a white t-shirt that made him clearly visible under the lights. He fired the shots with chilling precision before the vehicle sped away. The boldness and public nature of the attack deeply unsettled the community. The vehicle used in the crime was believed to be a light green or gray four-door sedan, possibly a mid-2000s Dodge Stratus, Ford Taurus, or a similar model. However, the lack of a visible license plate or distinct features made it difficult to trace. Surveillance footage was reviewed, but no clear images of the suspects or vehicle could be confirmed. A $20,000 reward was offered for any information, leading to the arrest of those responsible. It was a significant amount, aimed at encouraging witnesses to come forward. Still, despite relentless efforts by investigators, the case eventually went cold. Then, in May 2020, for nearly a decade after Calvin's death, a breakthrough came. After nearly a decade of little progress, detectives finally received new information regarding a possible suspect in the fatal shooting of Army Sergeant Calvin Wilhite Jr. This crucial lead reignited the long-dormant investigation and brought a long-awaited opportunity to move the case forward. In February 2025, authorities arrested 33-year-old Timothy Davis. Law enforcement confirmed his involvement in the case and charged him with second-degree murder. His bond was set at $250,000, marking a major milestone in a case that had remained unsolved for nearly 10 years. While Davis's arrest offered some sense of justice, questions still lingered about the extent of his role in the crime and whether other suspects were also involved. Investigators continued to pursue leads to determine whether Davis was the shooter or if he played a different part in the violent incident. In a public statement, the deputy chief of police addressed the Wilhite family directly, acknowledging the years of pain and uncertainty they had endured since the tragic night in 2015. To the Wilhite family, he said, "We know the past several years have been filled with grief and uncertainty. While we cannot undo the pain you've endured, we hope that knowing someone is now being held accountable brings you some measure of relief and helps in your healing process." For Calvin's mother, the arrest brought a measure of peace but not closure. While she appreciated the step forward, she remained focused on the fact that one suspect was still free. Her frustration was evident. "We just wanted justice for my son," she said, "because we knew someone out there knew the cowards that took my son's life and still said nothing." Although the arrest of Timothy Davis was a breakthrough, the case remains open. One suspect is still at large, and for Calvin's family, true justice won't come until everyone involved is held accountable. In a separate case dating back even further, another long-unsolved mystery finally saw a breakthrough. In October, 1984 highway workers in Arkansas discovered the body of an unidentified man near Interstate 40. His remains were badly decomposed and there was no identification on him. An autopsy determined he had been strangled, a clear sign of homicide. But without knowing who he was, investigators were left with few leads. At the time, forensic science was limited, and the case quickly went cold. For almost 40 years, the man's identity remained a mystery, but in 2024, the Arkansas State Police Cold Case Unit reopened the investigation, hoping new technology might finally reveal the truth. The remains were sent to a DNA lab in Texas for advanced testing. In March 2025, a breakthrough came. The remains were identified as Earl James McDaniel, a 53-year-old man originally from Kansas City, Missouri. Investigators confirmed his identity by comparing his DNA with that of his daughter, who now lives in Washington State. Earl James McDaniel was born in 1931 and had a difficult upbringing. His troubled life led him into crime, and his record included time in a Washington state prison in the 1960s and multiple arrests across the country during the 1980s. He was known for frequently moving from place to place, leaving behind a long trail of legal trouble. While one mystery was solved, his identity another remained. Who ended his life, and why? Records showed that Earl James was last seen alive on September 11, 1984, after being pulled over for drunk driving in Oskaloosa. After that arrest, there were no further official records. His body was found in late October. The cause of death, a deliberate, possibly personal act. Investigators turned their attention to reconstructing Earl James's final days and sought anyone who may have seen or interacted with him between mid-September and late October 1984. They hoped to uncover whether his killer was someone he knew or a stranger. Despite the decades that have passed, the Arkansas State Police remain committed to solving the case. They encourage anyone with information to come forward in hopes of bringing long-overdue justice to Earl James McDaniel. For nearly 50 years, she was known only as Jane Doe 1973. On November 19, 1973, hunters discovered the skeletal remains of a young woman near the banks of the St. Vrain River in Colorado. The location was just north of Colorado Highway 66, about 4 miles west of Platteville, with no identification or personal belongings to guide them. Investigators were left with little to go on. At the time, no local missing persons reports matched her description, and the forensic tools of the 1970s offered limited assistance. Authorities suspected foul play, but with no name and no leads, the case quickly went cold. Decades passed. Over the years, investigators revisited the mystery, hoping that advancements in forensic technology would someday offer answers. Families across the country continued to search for loved ones, never knowing that one of them may have already been found buried without a name. Eventually, detectives confirmed that Jane Doe's remains were interred at Lynn Grove Cemetery in Greeley, Colorado. In April 2022, nearly 50 years after her discovery, officials made the decision to exhume the body in the hope of obtaining viable DNA for modern testing. Forensic experts carefully extracted genetic material, and genealogists began the painstaking process of DNA analysis and comparison using advanced genetic genealogy. In February 2024, after nearly 2 years of work, a major breakthrough came. A forensic genealogy analyst from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation submitted a report to the Weld County Sheriff's Office. The results strongly suggested that Jane Doe 1973 was, in fact, Roxanne Colleen Leadbeater, a 15-year-old girl who had gone missing decades earlier. With this information in hand, investigators began the process of contacting Roxanne's surviving family. Sadly, they learned that her parents and brother had passed away years earlier and over. Knowing what had happened to the daughter and sister they once so desperately searched for, the moment that should have brought closure was bittersweet. The mystery was finally solved. But those who loved her most were no longer alive to hear the truth. Roxanne was born in 1958 and lived in Los Angeles, California, near Redondo Beach. She shared a close bond with her family and attended Lusinger High School. She was a typical teenager full of life, close to her parents and brother, and loved by her community. But one day, everything changed. Roxanne didn't return home as expected, and her family quickly grew alarmed. She had never gone missing before and always stayed in touch. Her parents and brothers searched the neighborhood and reached out to her friends, hoping someone had seen her, but no one knew where she had gone. Days passed, then weeks, and their growing fear turned into heartbreak. Despite their efforts, her disappearance was never officially reported to law enforcement, and Roxanne quietly became one of countless missing girls whose cases fell through the cracks. Now, decades later, detectives worked to locate any surviving relatives who might remember her. They found Roxanne's first cousins, but the family had grown distant over the years. The cousins confirmed they remembered her disappearance, saying she went missing around 1972 when she was just 15 years old. That timeline aligned with investigators' suspicions and confirmed that her case had remained unknown to law enforcement for decades. However, when detectives reached out to multiple law enforcement agencies across California in an effort to verify her original disappearance or file any historical report, they encountered further complications. A troubling obstacle stood in the way of solving Roxanne Colleen Leadbeater's case. None of the law enforcement agencies in California had any record of her ever being reported missing. It was as if her disappearance had never been officially documented, adding another layer of mystery to an already complex case. In January 2025, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's forensic genealogy analyst officially confirmed that the remains known as Jane Doe 1973 belonged to Roxanne Leadbeater. This conclusion was based on a kinship DNA comparison between her remains and those of a surviving cousin. After more than 5 decades, Roxanne's name was finally restored. Her identity was no longer lost to time, and her story could be acknowledged. The director of the CBI emphasized the significance of the breakthrough. This case highlights the importance of preserving evidence, even for crimes that are decades old. Advancements in DNA technology have given us powerful tools to help solve cold cases and bring long overdue answers to families who never gave up hope. But as one mystery was resolved, another emerged. How had a 15-year-old girl disappeared, without a trace, only to be found nearly 1,000 miles away in Colorado? Why had no record of her being missing ever existed? These questions remain unanswered. The investigation into Roxanne's death remains open, with the cause and manner of her death still undetermined. Another haunting case, this time from Connecticut, tells the story of Andrea Michelle Reyes, a toddler who vanished without a trace in 1999. On October 5, 1999, Andrea's family was devastated when the 23-month-old disappeared from her home in New Haven, Connecticut. Born in 1997, Andrea was the only child of Carlos Reyes and Rosa Tenorio, a married couple whose relationship had become deeply strained. After ongoing conflict, the couple decided to separate, and a bitter custody battle followed. The court ultimately granted full custody of Andrea to her father, but the family's nightmare deepened just days later. Andrea was living with her father when she was taken from their home. Authorities were quickly notified and launched a full investigation. Police interviewed neighbors, canvassed the area, and collected all available evidence. Early in the investigation, suspicion fell on Andrea's mother, Rosa Tenorio, who did not have legal custody at the time. Investigators believed she had abducted Andrea and fled to Mexico, specifically to the city of Puebla. An arrest warrant was issued for Tenorio for custodial interference. But despite immediate efforts, authorities were unable to locate her. Leads went cold, and the case stalled. For decades, Andrea remained missing. Still, her father never gave up hope, refusing to believe that his daughter was lost forever. He made multiple trips to Mexico, following up on any information that might lead to Andrea's whereabouts. He believed she was alive and living with her mother. On 2023, after 24 years of heartbreak and unanswered questions, the New Haven Police Department reopened the case. Armed with modern investigative tools, they began re-examining old evidence and interviewing witnesses. They also issued new search warrants and used social media to spread awareness and track down leads. What came next would finally begin to lift the veil on Andrea's decades-long disappearance. Investigators eventually traced Andrea's possible whereabouts to Puebla, Mexico, where they believed she had been living for many years under the care of her mother. Given the complexity of the case and the decades that had passed, DNA testing that became the most reliable